Hello, Earthlings. Welcome along to another episode of Still Alive. You're more than welcome. I shall do some introductions in a while. You'll notice that I'm on my own. I got a phone call from Ronnie's wife, Louise, saying that Ronnie is no longer with us, unfortunately. And she described the situation as satisfactory. But I said, well, you know, if you can find a used balaclava and wave it under his nose, you might be able to revive him. And that's what happened. And so, Ronnie, you're still alive.
I was brought back to life by a very smelly balaclava.
Yeah, it was just like old times.
In fact, I've got a funny story that involves a balaclava, or it actually involves the lack of a balaclava.
It's not down your trousers, is it?
Well, yeah, it's a funny story, but it's a little bit of a risque story, so I don't know whether you want me to tell it on this program. But I do have a funny story.
Everybody's taking us seriously. You should know us by now. Come on, people.
Yeah, you see, I told you they'd they'd be worried. See,
yeah.
they probably fainted, a few of them.
Anyway, Michael's here. Hello, Michael. Bianca, Paul Hatherley. Hello, BC. Darren Furlong, Colleen, Kate, Jay, Jennifer's here, and I think we're up to date so far. So yeah, so give us your story then, Ron.
Well, what it was years ago, there was I knew this young woman, and she wanted me to.
Did she?
Yeah, she wanted me. Yeah, but like under certain conditions, because she wanted me to burst into the bedroom wearing nothing but a balaclava. You see.
Okay.
And
but that would cover all of you anyway, wouldn't it?
Ron? well. You see, one of the things about the ALF was everyone thought that we wore balaclavas all the time, but in fact, that wasn't really true. And balaclavas were only really worn for when photos were taken.
Yeah, there's a bit of a myth that there was all a bit of a macho thing about it.
So the thing was, I didn't have a balaclava. So I said, well, I haven't got a balaclava. And she said, we must have a balaclava. You're in the ALF. You must have a balaclava. I said, no, I haven't got a balaclava. And she said, well, that's no good. That's nothing doing sort of thing. So I said to her, well, what if I put a pair of underpants over my head? Will that do? But unfortunately, it wouldn't. So not having a balaclava actually cost me quite dearly on that occasion. But it kind of, yes, it did. But that does actually kind of sort of portray the myth that ALF people went around in balaclavas all the time. Because I actually never had a balaclava. I only ever wore a balaclava once on one particular raid we did, and that was because the film crew came with us and were like filming the whole thing, and so everyone wore balaclavas. But normally we didn't. It was only like afterwards when the photos were taken to disguise their faces. It would not really. It weren't technically really balaclava. It's their ski masks, with the holes for the eyes and the nose and that. And in fact, I had to abandon my part in the raid because the balaclava made all my glasses steam up and I couldn't see. So I had to pull out and let the other ones carry on because I couldn't see anything. And that's the only time that I've ever worn a balaclava stroke ski mask.
Can you? I'm sure I've asked you this question before, Ronnie, but can you clear up that thing about in the Animals film? You lead a group of people kind of across the camera because I always remember this. It's kind of really weird. You kind of like do a bit of a pirouette turn and kind of just look kind of arrogant kind of thing for a second, and then you go, these people in the masks are unknown to the law, whereas that, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But, but they had kind of weird kind of things on, right? And so was that deliberate? Did you do that?
I kind of don't really know. They look like they all look like the Elephant Man, didn't they? They had kind of Elephant Man
they were kind
on.
of like just like sheets with holes.
I kind of don't know. Perhaps there was a shortage of ski masks. A shortage of ski masks. I remember we got this parcel. It was sent to the ALF press office, and it was actually from an Irish woman, and she, you know, and she sent this parcel, and she said, I've made these for the activists to wear on raids. I opened the packet, and it looked like a load of balaclavas, but when I looked at them, there was no holes in them. There were no holes. So I don't know what that was, but
maybe it was this Irish woman here. I've got a mask fetish.
I've got a mask fetish. Oh dear. I wonder if this is the same person.
Anyway,
so underpants are no good then for you. Yeah.
No, so we've got business to hand. So we're talking about protest, and we're thinking in terms of there's kind of 4 questions to be raised, and some kind of intricate kind of discussion, perhaps. But I think in the first instance, because I wanted to bring this famous picture up, Ronnie, which you'll recognise, of course.
Yes.
And it's been suggested, right, that this would be illegal with these new laws, because this, apparently, the linking arms is supposed to be a version of locking on nowadays. Have you heard that?
No, I've not. I've kind of not heard that. But I think an interesting thing about the new laws. I mean, there's new laws coming in here in the UK for people that kind of don't know, maybe folks from other countries, to further restrict the right to protest. And that consists of, they've created additional offences connected with protests, and they've also kind of made some of the penalties for existing offences higher, and they've given the police increased powers to intervene to kind of prevent or
they've got enough already, haven't they, Ronnie?
Well, you see, this is the thing, that you see this locking on thing. It's like where people, one person handcuffs themselves to another person or something, or to an object. In most, if not all cases, that would be covered by existing law. It would be covered by the law of obstructing the highway, or the law of aggravated trespass. So that, you know, a lot of these things are all already covered by law. You know, they're making these new laws when what they're making the laws against are actually already covered by existing law.
So what's the point then?
I think with this government that a lot of it, not all of it, but I think a lot of it is vote catching. Because you see, if you kind of look at, you know, what is the motivation for the laws, new laws in this country, and the government have stated this, are actions by groups like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, and there's a group called Insulate Britain, who did a lot of, especially Just Stop Oil and Insulate Britain, they did a lot of kind of sitting in the road and holding up traffic and all that kind of thing. And in some of those cases, they'd be handcuffed to one another or whatever. And of course, that you know, a lot of people are annoyed about that. You know, people that kind of probably were held up by someone sitting in the road and they missed Love Island or something very important that they were doing in their life because someone sat in the road, and so they're you know a lot of the members of the public moaning and groaning. And you see, because the government's in need of votes, I mean, you know, our government is really very unpopular. They've done a lot of like stuff that's kind of made them unpopular with the public. You know, their ratings in opinion polls are very low, and so they're looking to do stuff that will increase their popularity with the public. Not all of the public, but a certain section of the public, because they don't care how much they offend protesters, because they know that those protesters never going to vote Conservative in a million years anyway. So they don't care how much they, upset protesters or people that are campaigning for, progressive social change. They don't care how much they upset those people at all. But they're pandering to reactionary and bigoted elements in our society, of which there are very, very many. And one only has to look at the Brexit vote. I mean, for me, it was a racist vote. People voted for Brexit for kind of for racist reasons.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Like kind of if not the sort of people that would be out on the street marching with the British National Party or anything like that, or the English Defence League. But I think there are a lot of people in this country that kind of hold racist views, and that was what the people pushing Brexit, they pandered to that. And so I think that goes to show the kind of mindset of a large number of people in this country. And I think the Tories are appealing to that sort of person, and because that sort of person, for other reasons, maybe kind of are kind of not liking the Tories as much as they used to, because of the various errors that the Tories have made in government. And so this is an attempt to kind of win those people back, by saying, oh, we're going to take strong action against these terrible people that sit in the road and cause disruption, when in fact the laws to kind of deal with that already exist. They already exist.
Well, they're asking about the new ones. Are they? Where is it in the process of bringing it about?
Some of the laws have come into effect, and some of them are due to come into effect. The new laws. But loads of things.
The thing that's confusing is the fact that they've got those powers already, and so now there's some new laws, and then maybe more. But yes. What's the difference between the two?
Well, there is a difference. I mean, the new laws do make things worse for protesters, but not as much as some people might think, in terms of how much they extend what the law is already, because the police already have considerable powers to deal with protest. It's just the thing is that the police very often don't exercise those powers because they use their discretion to not exercise those powers, because they've only got limited resources, and in actual fact, the resources of the police have been cut by this government.
Yeah,
and the reason is because crime. Who are the main victims of crime? The main victims of crime are the poor. They're not the rich. The main victims of crime are the poor. So if you cut the police, if you cut the resources to the police force, that impacts far more on the poor than it does on the rich, because all these rich people, they can afford their own security. They live in gated estates. They're much less likely to become the victims of crime than some poor person that lives in social housing or something like that. So they cut the resources to the police because, of course, they don't want to tax the rich, because the rich would need to be taxed to pay for better policing. You see, so the police are under pressure. The numbers have been cut. They don't want to spend time arresting protesters, taking the police station, processing them, and all that. Really, do you think someone joins the police because they go, I want to join the police because I want to go and arrest protesters? No, they don't. They think in their head, well, I want to arrest a burglar or a robber or something like that. That's why they join the police, not to kind of arrest someone sitting in the road, you see. But you see that I think what's happened is the government's put pressure on the police. And now, if you look at the people, there were people arrested prior to the coronation. People arrested, in the area, and I mean, some Animal Rising people were arrested holding a training session that was nothing to do with the coronation, quite some distance away. The police burst into the room where they were doing the training and arrested them all.
They were just sat in a circle, weren't they?
They were sat in a circle, just non-violent training for like non-violent resistance. Nothing to do
They,
the
they were
coronation.
just about to start that thing about
Yeah, but
everybody
those,
introduce themselves.
but all those arrests were done under existing law. They weren't done under the new law.
Yeah.
Because if you think someone's having a meeting, if the police can conjure up this kind of excuse that people are having a meeting and they're conspiring, they're coming to an agreement to carry out something illegal, then they can arrest those people. They can arrest. I mean, we had this. I remember many years ago. Well, it's in the 1970s. I remember I was involved in hunt saboteurs, and we arrived at the meat of a hunt. And after a very short time, the police arrested us all and took us to the police station. And we said, I said, what are you arrested us for? We haven't done anything illegal. And they said,
Breach of the
you've been
peace.
arrested for conspiracy. Because you can be arrested for conspiracy to cause any offence. Yes, conspiracy to cause breach of the peace is an offence. You haven't done it. The alleged crime is that you've planned to do it. So you don't even have to do anything. If you've just gathered to disrupt a hunt, they can, in theory, arrest you for conspiracy to cause breach of the peace. And what they did was they arrested us, held us in the police station until the hunt was over, and then let us go and said, all right, we've decided this, we're not going to charge you and you can go. Because it was preventative. They did prevent us from, because obviously for some reason, I don't know whether whoever was in charge of the police that day was a hunt sympathiser or whatever. But they've got powers to do that. Now they very rarely, that's very rare. You very rarely get that hunt saboteurs arrested like that. But the police do have the powers to do it if they want to. But it's just they don't use those powers.
And then they end up in front of magistrates who go hunting.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, they don't even have to so none of those people that are arrested prior to the coronation have been charged. They were arrested to stop them doing what they were going to do or what the police thought they were going to do. And then when the coronation, when it was all over, they were just let go, you see. And so they can do, they can do that. They already have the powers to do that, right? What makes a difference is the pressure that's put on the police by the government to do certain things, right? That and in some ways that's kind of more serious than kind of what the law says, because, there are all these laws already, but the police don't enforce them. But if the government put pressure on the police to enforce those laws, then they kind of will. Or if the government put the pressure on the police to not enforce laws, they won't. And I believe that's the case with the Hunting Act. The Hunting Act is not enforced because the government doesn't want it enforced. The Hunting Act's a very weak piece of legislation anyway. But if you had a government that said we want the Hunting Act enforced, and we're going to instruct chief constables, we want the police to go to hunts and to enforce the Hunting Act, then the police would. So it's down to the government. So the action of the police is determined by the government and the type of government you've got, and that's much more.
A new law then could just be a kick up the pants, then, couldn't it? Really?
Well, it's not. I don't think it's just the new laws. I think it's pressure being put on the police to enforce the law.
The old ones, yeah, that's what I mean.
The old law, or the new law. The old law, the new law, and that's where the problem lies. So the problem doesn't really lie with the police. The problem lies with the government. It's the government that's passing these laws, and it's the government that's putting pressure on the police to enforce the law. I mean, even if you look at things, I'll give you another example. Street stalls. I loads of people do street stalls. For vegan education or other issues, connected with animal rights, for instance. Now, those actually I think in almost all cases, holding a street stall would be against council bylaws, local authority bylaws. It's just that they don't enforce those laws in most cases. I mean, I used to do street stalls all over the place. I used to do them all around the West Midlands. And there were one or two places I knew I couldn't go because I'd go there and straight away the police would come and move me on, or somebody from the council, a council enforcement person, official would come and move me on and say, you're breaking the bylaws, you've got to move. But that was only in one or two places. Most places they just can't be bothered. They can't be bothered to enforce those
Yeah,
laws.
in Dublin, it's interesting. Cop says to us that what it was that they're quite tolerant of social movements having information stalls, but if it looks too kind of tradey, if you like, if that's a word, then it might attract people to just kind of sell, and you end up with a kind of like an informal outdoor market suddenly, and that's what they're worried about in Dublin, and so that's why they kind of clamp down on some people somewhere.
But you probably find that the actual law itself, they could just remove you under the law.
They could, but they don't.
But they don't
for that reason, yeah.
But an interesting example of like where the police did use powers was when Shack was going strong, the Stop Hunting Animal Cruelty and the campaign against Hunting Life Science Laboratory, that what they did was if somebody was holding a street stall to promote Shack, to promote that campaign, there came a time when those stalls would be moved on. The people would be told to go. And so there was loads of places throughout the country where if somebody set up a stall to promote Shack, either the police or the local authority would move them, right? And that was because of instructions of the government to the police and to local authorities. You know, if someone does anything in support of Shack, then you've got to remove them, tell them to go.
So the government can take the discretion away.
The government was putting pressure on the police to, whereas normally the police would just have ignored it.
Yeah.
But the government was putting pressure on the police and on local authorities to enforce those bylaws, because they didn't like Shack, because they wanted to crush the Shack campaign.
Yeah, I understand that.
So that's an example of like where the police, the police, often don't enforce things.
Yeah, so it's time to move on to the animal advocacy movement then, because this is slightly different. But to go back to Martin Luther King,
with the first question, do we protest too much? My answer to that is, I think there are times when protest is not the best way of using our resources. There are some times when it's not, and where it would be better to use to take other forms of action.
Yeah, let's come on to the detail of that in a minute, Ronnie. But first of all, we want just to kind of re-emphasize that there's two issues. First of all, that protest in general needs to be defended and fought for, and so any new laws to curtail that needs to be opposed and everything. But that's a kind of separate issue.
The second part of the question is could the new laws curtailing protest be a blessing in disguise?
Yeah.
Well,
let's come on to that. Let's just go back to protest in general. Now, this is a very famous picture. Now, do you know why? This is CND, right?
No, to be quite honest, I kind of don't know why. Is it because of someone who's in the picture?
It's for three people in the picture. So you've got the third person on the right is Donovan.
Oh yes, it's Donovan.
Next to Donovan is Joan Byers, and then the guy on the younger guy on the left is Mark Bolan.
Oh right. Yes.
Yeah, and so that's a well-known picture. This is an actual rare version of the same kind of thing.
Yeah. So CND is a prime example of a kind of protest movement that included direct action as well. The CND had a direct action wing called Committee of 100, and they did things like sitting in the road and stuff like that. It's an example of, sadly, of failure, because of course we have we still have nuclear weapons in this country, the form of Trident, and in fact there was a vote in Parliament to renew Trident, not all in recent years. So CND is an example of like a mass movement involving protest and involving direct action that actually failed.
Got a lot of attention, and it
got a lot of attention, but it didn't succeed in its. So we still have nuclear weapons.
We do indeed.
These things don't always succeed
Yeah. So moving on to our movement, then, if you like, to put it that way. So you're saying that the most contentious thing you say in the blurb, I suppose, is that this blessing in disguise. So
yeah. Well,
say a bit more about
that. On balance, my answer to that question would be no, because I think that it's not a good thing that protest is being even more restricted, and I think these laws are something to be resisted, because I think that because you see, the thing is, these new laws aren't just they're not just going to interfere with kind of what you might call just plain protest. They're also going to make it that much harder for people to carry out sort of awareness raising direct action as well. And I think that's that's a negative. So I think it's not a good thing that these laws are being brought in. But I nevertheless think that protest is and the value of protest and effectiveness of protest is something that needs to be discussed.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of protests in general, that's one thing. But I mean, are you suggesting then that we've done too much of it in lieu of doing something which we could have done?
I think very often in terms of the animal rights movement, the animal liberation movement, I think a lot of protests have been carried out that kind of haven't been effective. Because I think what tends to happen is a knee-jerk reaction. Like, people learn about a place that's there's a place that's kind of doing something to something to animals they don't like. Say a laboratory, for instance, and people say, well, let's go and have a protest outside there. And when you analyze it, those protests kind of have very little effect in terms of changing anything. And I think if people's energy was put into different forms of action, it would kind of be more effective.
Yeah, and you've got this 3-part model, right? Which is education, protest, and direct action.
Yeah, I think action for animal liberation can be divided into those 3 categories: education, protest, and direct action.
But they're interlinked, aren't they?
They're interlinked because both protest and direct action can have an educational element to it. You see, and direct action is often kind of intertwined with protest as well. But I tend to think that, like, if what we're talking about in terms of protest is just if there's protest without, if the protest doesn't include direct action, and if the protest doesn't have an educational element, right, then I think it's then questionable how effective that protest is. If people go and stand with placards outside a laboratory that's in the middle of nowhere and hardly anyone sees them, then how effective is that? How effective is that in kind of creating any change? You see what I mean? And yet people will do that. And people will do that at a slaughterhouse in the middle of nowhere. Will stand outside there with placards.
Yeah, we've got an example of that. So this is SAVE that we're talking about, right? And I'm kind of with you on this. If you think about education, protest, and direct action, then SAVE is the latter 2, protest and direct action. But where is the education? And so the education seems to be restricted to online. If sharing it around the vegan community is that's what I'm saying. Presumably, they would also suggest that they want it shared to as many non-vegans as possible. So the banner on your screen here is something that we did in 2018, which was the photographs from a SAVE were then brought into the town. And there's a new one. I was trying to find a picture of it. There's a new one from this month. I think it was 3rd of May. And they've been translated into lots of pictures that we had on the street the last couple of weeks. And so this is where you can then bring the education part of it in. And so in that sense, all three components would be present,
Yeah.
right?
But you say, but of course, you don't have to go every week to kind of achieve that.
No,
And
well,
I'd
that's
say
always the issue. Why
if,
go every week?
if people are going every week, I'd say, well, look, you kind of don't need to go every week to get the photos and stuff. If you go every so often, and the other thing, of course, the other thing that kind of protests can where you can kind of make protest education is get publicity about your protest, maybe in the local newspaper, and then say you're doing a protest outside a slaughterhouse. You could get published in the local newspaper about it, and through that publicity, you could encourage people to go vegan. See, but you can't do that all the time because they'll cover it the first time you go outside there, but they're unlikely to cover it again because it's the same story. So it's very limited, you see. And so all those times,
it's also exactly the same. So in terms of if you go as a save movement to get pictures and film, it's exactly the same from week to week, from month to month, even year to year, isn't it? I mean, and also it's a globalized thing. You probably could see the same pictures virtually everywhere. The only difference actually is the size and type of vehicle going in, not the other animals, right?
So what I'd say is if instead of repeatedly going to somewhere like that, that I can see the value of doing it sometimes, getting the photos, using them to educate people that this is what's going on your doorstep. If you're using that,
well, that's the bit that needs repeating, isn't it? The going to the public bit.
Yeah, you see, but and if you want attention in the local media, that you don't have to keep going there to get that because they're not going to cover it multiple times. So on the other occasions, instead of doing that, if those people were to do outreach, if they were to do, an information stall, or they were to do door dropping in, say in those countries where people are able to do that, delivering leaflets through people's letterboxes, that would be a much more effective use of their time in terms of promoting veganism and combating the oppression of animals by the food industry than repeatedly doing something. Because you see, I think what happens is people tend to kind of do things that kind of somehow appeal to them emotionally, rather than thinking objectively about what is the real effect of this. In other words, I think there's a laboratory, isn't it terrible? They're torturing animals in there. I'm going to go outside there with a placard, right? Even though hardly any members of the public are going to see me, even though the people in there aren't going to give a shit that I'm standing there with a placard. It made no difference to them. That people tend to do that because it's like somehow sort of satisfies their own emotions.
Yeah. So how does Camp Beagle fit into your thoughts here then? Right?
Well, I think Camp Beagle's a bit of a mixture, really. I think if there's an educational element to protest, then that can be a good thing. And I think there has been an educational element to Camp Beagle in terms of raising awareness about animal experiments, and there are people that have gone to Camp Beagle because
I understand the educational element. What I'm asking is, couldn't they just set up for 3 days once a month and have the same educational thing? Because
I think well, yes,
not much education on the street itself, is there?
Yeah, I think probably so. Yes, I think probably so. I mean, how the permanent presence there makes a difference, I kind of don't know, to be quite honest.
Yeah. Okay. Another example would be Meet Your Meat, which is I think there's been two. I think there's been one in the Republic of Ireland and one in Northern Ireland, so as I remember. Now that's where you've got the three elements again. You've got the protest actually going into the farm. It's direct action because there's a lot of people, taking action which is not legal. Not that direct action has to be illegal, and then there's an educational element to it. I think it would become like the save if people were going into farms every week it become, well, why?
Yeah,
Why?
well, I think it depends where the farms were. I mean, if they were in different localities, then every time that happened, publicity could be obtained in the local media. But in terms of national media, then yes, if you repeat that too often, they're not going to cover it, or they're only going to cover it every so often, then they're not going to cover all of them. But local media, if you're doing it in different places, then yes, and if you're kind of geared up to kind of get those things into local media, because I think one of the problems with kind of our movement these days is that people tend to ignore the media, and in particular ignore local media. There's a lot of publicity. Local newspapers will really often carry articles on they will carry an article about quite a small action, to be honest.
And you're more control of the content too, aren't you? Because
they
tend to. I mean, they might just cut and paste the entire thing.
I mean, in our local paper, we had a collection to raise funds for the Badger Trust, and it was for the campaign against the badger cull, which has been done under the pretext that badgers spread TB to cows. But that's a pretext because the badger cull isn't really done for that reason. But so because of that, we were able to use the street collection to kind of educate people about going vegan. It's the best way that you could combat this kind of coming together.
You've got a direct link with the dairy as well.
Yeah, it's a dairy industry.
So.
And street collection, just a street collection we had, and we had someone dressed as a badger, which kind of helped. Well, we got a story in a local newspaper about it. Did a press release in the local newspaper and took a good photo, and they covered it. So you can get even something like that. You can get in a local newspaper. People don't think about doing that. People don't think about extending, because thousands and thousands of people will see things like that. But people don't think, very very often they don't think of doing it.
Well, it's interesting. I think that's something to do with the fact that people probably don't think that people read newspapers anymore. And of course, there would be a demographic difference. You can almost guarantee that it will be older members of the community still.
Well, there's no doubt that fewer people read local newspapers, and the circulation of local newspapers and the number of copies sold has diminished because people get their news from the internet, don't they? I mean, I do. I don't. I look at a news app. I don't get a newspaper. But nevertheless, these papers are delivered, and they're often free newspapers that are delivered through, to thousands of homes very often, and people will get to look at them. So it's another avenue of spreading the message that so often. I
suppose in some way it actually is better than door dropping in the sense that people are not feeling as though somebody's trying to foist something on them. It's just in the paper, right? And so
it kind of is. I suppose the other side to that is that I think there are kind of, there are maybe quite a lot of people that don't really look at the newspaper. It comes through the door and they maybe put it straight in the recycling. I mean, might do that with the leaflet too, but at least, the kind of, your article about what you did will be kind of hidden in the newspaper, whereas with a leaflet, it's right there in front of you.
Yeah, it swings around.
But that's not to say, but that's not to say that it's not worthwhile getting stuff in the local.
Well, Josh here says, I can't remember the last time I bought a newspaper magazine, and I remember the magazine, but I don't remember the newspaper.
No. I mean, we don't because we live in a village. They don't deliver our local newspaper here, but I look at it online. There's a digital edition of it, which is exactly the same as the printed edition.
Kind of not the same as having it in your hand, though, is it? In a way, but
yeah, I get my news from the Guardian app, and I pay a subscription, but it's nowhere near it's much less than £2.80 a copy. It's probably just a few pennies.
So that would be £2.80 a day, wouldn't it?
£2.80 a day. It's not that. No.
Yeah. Going back to save, Ronnie, what's your attitude to this? I don't like protests at slaughterhouses where they stop trucks to speak to animals and take a photo or say sorry to the animals. I hate that happening even for the moment, as it prolongs their suffering.
Yeah,
Because
I think this is another point, and
there's a lot of pushback, isn't there? Because a lot of people go for the bearing witness idea. Yeah.
yeah. Well, the bearing witness idea has this kind of religious kind of
Yeah, that's what
connotation.
I always thought. Yeah.
You see, I remember bearing witness. So it reminds me of like years and years ago when I first became active in the movement. There were these people, and they were mostly kind of old, older women. And they'd go and stand outside a laboratory with a placard saying, stop this cruelty or whatever. And they'd just stand there, and often they'd be on their own or there'd be two of them. And I'd say to them, what are you doing this for? Because it's kind of, I try to be as nice as possible, as diplomatic to them as possible, I say, what are you doing this for? Because it's not changing. What you're doing isn't changing anything. It's not changing. It's not, the public aren't, where you are, the public don't see you, and the people in the lab don't care. What are you doing for? And they say, we're bearing witness. But I thought, well, yeah, but like it doesn't change anything. So kind of what's the point? I didn't kind of get it, because it was like they were doing it for them, if you see what I mean.
Well, I'm not. I think that's a bit cynical, to be honest. But I mean, what about the element that another kind of part of the argument about bearing witness is the suggestion that this will be right from the beginning of life, and they're now going to have their life taken from them. They've never had, and likely never to have anything. I mean, obviously, activists say things like love and everything, but they've never had anybody show them any concern, any kind of gentleness. They're usually kind of, knocking them around, pushing them this way and that kind of stuff. And do you think there's anything in that part of it?
Well, the thing is, if they've only ever known fear from other humans and bad treatment from other humans, how are they going to know that this group of humans outside the slaughterhouse is going to be any different?
Yeah, well, I think that's a very important point, because, of course, the pictures you get from SAVE are other animals looking at you with fairly terrified eyes. And then the argument would be that's because of what's happened to them. It could be because they're encountering yet another human being and they don't know what's about to happen to them.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of sort of about the pros and cons of actually, the effect of the the SAVE movement's actions on the animals themselves that are going into the slaughterhouses, which is kind of which is interesting to discuss, but it's kind of a little bit away from how effective those actions are in terms of changing things, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, we'll come back on track, because another element of what you wanted to talk about is has protests largely been therefore a failure, because we've kind of done too much of that without either integrating it into the education part of it, which you would then say would vastly improve the protest part of it, right? Or we've just done too much of it in lieu of doing the education part.
Yeah, you see, yes, and I think that's the thing. I think that you see if where people kind of carry out protest, right? It's kind of this the aim. The aim is to, if other than education, if there's there's some protests can be a form of education, but other than education, if it's a protest that doesn't educate in any way, right, then the aim of that protest would be either to put pressure on the government to bring in changes, or to put pressure on a company or an individual to change. That somehow it's about, we're going to put pressure. Somehow this is going to exert pressure to force change, right? And I think just done in that, when you just look at that aspect of it is what's been largely a failure. Unless there's you see, where there's an educational aspect, then there can be success. And I mean, I'll give an example of that. It's like, say you have say you have a company, and there are examples in this country. I mean, for instance, like Canada Goose, and I think some other companies where they include fur in their garments, and people are protested outside their outlets, outside their stores. But those protests include an educational element, because what you're saying to members of the public is boycott this store because they sell garments that contain fur. And those type of protests, have had some success in persuading those companies to dispense with including fur in their garments. Now, how much that really improves things in the scheme of things is like another question, but nevertheless,
let me clarify that. Are you
Yeah.
saying that the protest is single issue, but the talking to the public might not
Yeah,
be, because
but-
then it'll go into
no,
vegan?
what I'm saying is that the protest isn't just, like we're, somehow this protest we're doing because we're outside your store is going to put pressure on you to change. What's happening is because the protesters are educating members of the public not to go in the stores think we're going to lose money. We're going to lose money. So they're not changing their policy because people are stood outside with placards. They're changing their policy because they're worried that the people stood outside with placards are going to persuade members of the public not to shop at their store. So it's the educational aspect of the protest that they're worried about. And it's the same with when I was involved in a campaign. Louise and I, we ran a campaign against the greyhound racing industry here in the UK. Well, for 13 years it was, and basically a big part of our campaign was people kind of holding what would appear to be protests outside the outside dog tracks, where they'd stand with placards and banners and hand leaflets to people going in. But you see, the reason, and as a result, or can I say, like, those actions played a major part in a considerable number of the dog tracks closing, right? But the reason for that wasn't because we were directly putting pressure on the dog tracks or saying, oh, we don't like these people standing outside. It wasn't that. It was because the demonstrations and the leaflets handed to people educated those members of the public not to go to the dog racing or not to go to the dog racing again. So it was because those tracks lost money because of their attendance is going down that pushed them to closure, if you see what I mean. It wasn't that they thought, oh, there's people outside, we don't like it, so we're going to close. It wasn't that. It was the educational aspect of what we were doing that led to the tracks closing. It wasn't the protest aspect. You see, so that's where you've got you kind of, people might say, oh, those protests succeeded, but they didn't succeed because they were protests. They succeeded because they educated people.
There's some cynical comments being made in the comments about protests and stuff, but let me hit you with a bit of sociology on the protest. What about community building and networking? That they're valuable just in those aspects?
Well, I think other forms of action are valuable in those aspects as well. If you can get a group of people together to do a protest locally, then you can equally get
it doesn't create that feeling of being part of something big then, does it?
Well,
we know psychologically that is important for humans.
Well, I think if people are doing, say, a vegan outreach store, then you are part of something very, very big, aren't you? Because you're tackling sort of.
No, but there's not hundreds of people there marching along the street.
Oh, you're talking about demonstrations now. You're talking about big demonstrations like in London.
That's a protest, isn't it?
Well, protest demonstration. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about like the small scale one. Well, yes, the big ones. Now, I've been to loads of demonstrations in London. Most of them I really question whether it was worth going. The ones that I haven't questioned, funny enough, are the animal rights marches, because I think the animal rights marches that have been held in London and elsewhere, because they used to be held in various cities, I think that they've got a really, I think they've had, and hopefully still will have, a really strong educational effect, because members of the public, read the placards and banners. There's people giving leaflets out to members of the public. And so
But that's on all of them. I mean, they all do the same, don't they, in that respect? I mean, which ones have you been to that doesn't happen?
It sort of depends. You see, the thing about a kind of like an animal rights march is there's kind of really quite a clear message you can give to people that people can act on. You can get people to act on that message. The type of marches where I felt didn't really achieve anything. I mean, I've been like on big anti-austerity marches in London. I went to London twice
for the Trump thing, was it?
To go on marches when Donald Trump, and I came away thinking, well, the only thing really I felt was achieved was that kind of Louise was like in a wheelchair dressed as a badger and with a placard saying "Cull the Tories, not the Badgers," and people were interested, and we were able to give them leaflets about the badger cull that encouraged them to go vegan. So we did do a bit of vegan education in a small way.
Well,
I don't think that the march as a whole achieved anything. The same as the march. There was a huge march, is estimated as many as 2 million people in London against the when Britain was about to join the USA in invading Iraq, and there was this huge demonstration against Britain's involvement in the Iraq War. I think it was 2 million people. It made no difference. It made no difference because the government was set on that particular policy. So it wouldn't have mattered if there was 20 million people in London demonstrating. It would have made no difference to them, you see. And so I think that can be the problem with, trying to force.
But you guarantee, Ronnie, that if there was nobody there, they'd say that on the next question time.
Yes, but in terms of what difference it made, it would have been the same, you see. And I think this is the problem that you see. I think that kind of, and like going back to these new laws that have come in or are coming in, the pretext for bringing them in, or the reason the government say they bring them in, is because of is because of groups like Insulate Britain, where they've sat in the road, and Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion have stopped that type of protest now. But they did do disruptive protests at one time, like kind of civil resistance type stuff. And the pretext that the government have used for bringing in the new laws is we need to stop these people, holding up the traffic. We need to stop these people causing destruction. They already had existing legislation that covered those things. Don't need to bring in new laws to stop those things. It's already there. But the reason for the new laws, as I said, is that to appeal to kind of bigoted members of the public, of which there's very sadly really quite a large number. And so it's a vote. It's like a vote catching thing, I think. And so basically, what's happened is these actions, all these actions, which were supposed to bring about system change, right, have just resulted in an even more draconian system. They've actually resulted in bringing about the very opposite almost of kind of what they desired, because there's been the government's made a lot of these things are to do with like the climate crisis. As far as I can see, the government's made really no meaningful moves to combat the climate crisis at all. All they've done is brought in more stringent legislation against the people that are trying to kind of force them to do something about
Yeah,
it.
you suggested, Ronnie, that the ones that worked for you most were the animal rights ones. So if you think in terms of recent history, you talk about the surge ones.
Yeah.
So I mean, what was the aim of the surge ones? What did they aim to do? Was that just not community building and networking, or was it
Well,
something else?
no, I think it was just. I think that it was. I think in many ways the main aim was public, because it's like a kind of demonstration. I mean, a demonstration is kind of different to protest. A demonstration, I'm demonstrating kind of what I feel about this. I want to show you what I feel about this. I want to show you it kind of pretty much educate you, and that's what it was. Those marches, I think, had a very important educational effect on members of the public. They were outreach.
And what's the difference between that and a protest then?
Well, because you see that those marches have an educational element to them, but not all protests have that educational element, or they're done in a way that doesn't have an educational element. And I think that's kind of where the
Okay, well,
where
you
the
take the vegan street thing, which has started again. We've done two. The third one's going to be this Sunday. On the first one, an Italian guy and a Brazilian woman came up, and they turned up the second week to join in because they were both already vegan. They saw us. They go, "This is great. How can I get involved?" Yes, okay, we'll be there next week. Now, what is that? Is that a protest? Is it a demo, or is it education?
No, it's outreach, it's education, isn't it? Because they've been educated, they've been given information. That's what that is.
Isn't
I
it?
mean,
Not a protest?
you can get overlap. I mean, I think that direct action can be very, can be a really important means of raising awareness. In other words, of educating people. Now, you see, if you look at, if you kind of look at, say, stuff that Extinction Rebellion have done, and I suppose to an extent, a bit about stuff that, Animal Rebellion kind of did as well, that there were kind of, there seemed to be this idea behind it of kind of forcing the government to make change. In other words, we're gonna cause this fuss because, like, we want the government to bring in measures to combat the climate crisis, right? And in terms of like Extinction Rebellion and just the other groups, it's really to do with fossil fuels. With Animal Rebellion, it was to do with farming. This idea of we want the government to move the country towards a plant-based future, right? It's kind of causing a fuss to put pressure on the government to bring in change, right? But the problem with that is you're up against a totally intransigent government. You're up against the government's wedded to a certain ideology, where they're never going to accede to those demands. And as we've seen, the reaction is to bring in laws, not to accede to any of these demands, but to bring in more draconian laws against the protesters, right? So really, the best use of that kind of form of direct action is not to put pressure on a government that won't yield to pressure, but is to raise awareness so that the mindsets of ordinary people change, and so that eventually those ordinary people will vote in a government that's radically different to the one we've got now, and that will, accede to the things that the protesters want. For me,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
the only way.
I go with that because you
Mm.
could even draw an analogy between going to London and protesting at the Parliament would be as futile as going to a slaughterhouse and thinking that you're going to close the
It's
slaughterhouse down.
futile.
Right?
You see, the problem is the thing about people go to London, and it may be the same with any capital city where the kind of what people consider the seat of power to be. Like we've got Parliament in London, and there's the White House. Well, the Senate and the House of Representatives in the USA, they're located. I mean, are they Washington DC? I'm not sure. I think so, and all that, right? and in other countries the same, that people think we'll go there and protest. But you see, power doesn't really reside there. That's not where power comes from. Where power comes from is from the local areas, because those members of parliament or members of the various administrative bodies, of governing bodies of all the countries in the world, they come from localities. They're elected in various localities, right? To go, the ones in this country that you get like a member of parliament elected in what they call a constituency, in a local area, and then they go to parliament. So really, where power comes from is from local areas. Is from those members of parliament that are elected in local areas, and depending on the views and the mindset of those members of parliament, that is how parliament will be made up. So basically, that's an argument for locally focused education. Because if you can change the nature of the member of parliament, and if we can do that in enough constituencies, then we change the whole nature of parliament. And that's how you do it. Going and standing with the banner outside the House of Commons and that, it's pretty much a waste of time, because that's not really where power is. It comes from the local areas, you see. So what we need is more focus, on local areas. More focus on and like, how would you get, if you want someone decent to represent your area, who's going to go to parliament and try to bring in decent laws, whether those laws be on on giving proper protection to other animals, or in terms of social justice for humans, right? Then we have to educate people locally, so they vote differently. So they'll vote in someone that's half decent, instead of, like in most cases, someone that's bloody awful, as we have at the moment. You see, and if we want politicians who will be in favour of animal liberation and be in favour of veganism, then we basically need loads more vegan politicians. And how are you going to get those? Well, you're only going to get those by educating more people to go vegan, because the more vegans we have, the more vegan politicians we'll have, and the more vegans we'll have to vote for them. So that's fundamentally the way you create system change. You don't create system change because these organisations talk about system change, but really what they're trying to do is force the existing system to make concessions. That isn't system change. It's not system change at all, you see. And system change comes through. You'll only get system change through changing the mindset of ordinary people, because that's kind of where it all comes from, and largely, and that can, to some extent, come about through protest, if protest has an educational element to it, right? And it can come about through direct action if the direct action is done for awareness raising, and it can be. But so everything we do should have an element to it of educating the public, whether it's obviously vegan outreach has that. That's what that's all about. But with protests and with direct action, there should always be that element included in it, because that's fundamentally what we need to do.
Well, something interesting is that I did an interview last week, and one question was, if you were going to relive it, including, say, the ALF times and all that, what would you do different? And so we're going to re-record it because there's a technical problem. And so you presumably, given what you've just said on this particular topic today, you presumably would have structured the ALF to include the education element, rather than it ended up being foisted on you. It had been there from the beginning.
Yes, I mean, the thing is that I would have.
You've had a press office right from the start.
Yeah, well, there's a few things, right? First of all, that my whole. See, the ALF wasn't about educating people. The ALF was about putting direct pressure on companies that oppressed other animals, right? In terms of really of causing economic loss to them and putting them out of business, and maybe having an effect on the industry as a whole. And I think that and also one of the things that kind of came out of it was these people were frightened. It created fear. The ALF created fear amongst, say, the animal research community. But it wasn't really, the fear wasn't generated because of what we did. The fear was generated because of how the media reported it. You know, the media reported, you know, hyped everything up that we were these dangerous terrorists and all that, you know, hyped it right up. And then that caused the fear amongst, you know, amongst those people. Whereas we were really, you know, our aim really was like to cause economic loss. And yeah, it did succeed. You know, there were places did close down, and you know, I would argue the ALF did have a big effect on reducing the number of animal experiments that took place in the UK. But that it wasn't animal liberation. You know, the ALF achieved a great deal, but it came nowhere near to achieving animal liberation, and would not have come anywhere near to achieving animal liberation because it didn't act to educate ordinary people, and we didn't intend to educate ordinary people. That wasn't what it was all about.
No, so that's what I'm saying. That's the bit you would change, right?
Because you see, if you're going to use direct action as a tool of education, you can't do it like the ALF did it. You can't do it like the ALF did it. You've got to do it more like Animal Rising do it. Although, like in our last program, you know, we discussed some kind of ways we'd like to see Animal Rising change, you know, but you kind of do it, you know, you do it in a way where you're kind of because what you're after is like publicity and like attention seeking to raise awareness. And in order to do that, you don't have to indulge in serious criminality. You don't have to do things that's going to put you behind bars for like 5-10 years. You don't, you know, like their actions don't, you know, yes, they are against the law. And yes, you know, people have gone to prison, but only for short periods of time. You see, so it becomes more inclusive in that, you know, more people are probably prepared to be involved in something that, you know, where they're not so much at risk. and also the kind of I think if you're doing awareness raising direct action, I think the non-violence aspect of it is really, really important as well. Although the ALF did claim to be non-violent in that our actions were aimed at property, you know, rather than, you know, like physical attacks on people as individuals. So it's a different type of direct action. It's a different type of direct action. And the idea where, you know, where people are doing these things and they're not trying to escape. You see that they, you know, people do a thing, they wait around for the police to arrive, or they handcuffs onto something, so they're going to be arrested and all that. I think that sends a very strong message. I think that sends a much stronger message than if someone runs away, because it shows, well, you know, I'm here, I did this, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm not afraid to be caught for this because I know that I was in the right. And I think that kind of has a much stronger educational impact on the public than if people kind of just do something and then go away. But the reason we did that was because we weren't interested in educating the public. We just wanted to do maximum damage, get away, and then go somewhere else to do maximum damage again. And it was a completely different way of using direct action.
Yeah, okay, I get that. I'm just looking for something here, but forget that. So we've got some interesting comments just to finish off. We're over the hour, Ronnie, but there's some interesting stuff here. Colleen is saying, I think that was probably created by my comment. I was saying that no, that they're not doing that. And the interesting thing there, I suppose, is that that last bit, which is the first slaughterhouses that had a save kind of event were ones where there was no real public. There was like a couple of roads. I think most of the people were on the main road, and then there was a road parallel with it, and not many people actually passed the slaughterhouse, and so a lot of people wouldn't have actually seen it in terms of that element of awareness raising. Whereas Graham in the chat has found another slaughterhouse where it's actually across the road, I think, from a creche. So there's actually quite a lot of public around the slaughterhouse, which is a fairly unusual thing, because as Colleen is saying, usually they're right out of the way, right? And so this one is quite interesting in the sense that you can not only take the pictures back into town, as it were, or a variety of towns, but also there are people around right there and then as well. So that could be awareness raising, right?
Yeah, that could be, yeah. But I think at one time slaughterhouses used to be much more where people lived, much more within the community. And I think in more recent years they've moved out to industrial estates and out to the middle of nowhere. That's a recent development. I mean, they used to used to have them right in the middle of town. In our village, there was
in Yorkshire. There's a village.
We had a little slaughterhouse. There was a butcher shop, and he used to slaughter animals himself, and it was at the back of, it's not a butcher shop anymore; it's something else now. But in the yard at the back, that he'd kill the animals. So it's like a mini slaughterhouse, and that was just in the village, and that kind of thing used to be like everywhere.
A point from Sharon, Ronnie. The question is, do we protest too much? What if we stopped? What if we slowed down? So that's not quite what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that often protest kind of doesn't really have any effect, and there are more effective ways of bringing about change. That doesn't apply to all protests, because some protests can have elements within it that can bring about change. But the thing is that you see, to think that protest can really have an effect on the type of governments we've got around the world at the moment is kind of really quite naive, because they're strongly wedded to a particular ideology. They're strongly wedded to, like the government we have here in the UK. They're a far right government that's totally wedded to the ideology of neoliberalism.
So are you saying things to ban things then? Essentially, I mean, like,
what I'm saying is where protest is aimed at, we're doing this protest to force the government to do so and so, right? Where it's kind of done with that attitude, then it's very, very, very unlikely to succeed, because they're just not going to give into it. They're going to say, well, if it's contrary to their ideology, then they're just not going to listen to it. So basically what you've got to do is you've got to do things. You see, the thing is that we've always kind of had this attitude of forcing, we want to force change from the existing system. We want to force change from the existing powers that be. That's been our attitude. And what's happened is all we've got is crumbs from the table. When you think about the vast edifice of the oppression of other animals, right, compared with what we've actually gained in terms of legislation, what we've gained is kind of tiny. What we kind of gained over here. We got, all right, we've got the Hunting Act, which is like, very weak legislation that's not enforced because the government don't want the police to enforce it, and have probably instructed them not to enforce it. We've got there's a ban on fur farming, but fur can still be imported from other countries, and is, and like I could go on, like the number of animals that have actually been spared through.
Well, I suppose the counter argument Ronnie, would be we're not doing great creating vegan activists either. But going back to the point about kind of protest. So
Yeah.
what is Camp Beagle trying to do? Pressure the government or raise awareness, or is it both?
No, I mean, I think they are trying to pressure MBR Acres to close. I don't think they're pressure. The pressure is on the government to kind of for the government to close MBR Acres, the beagle breeding place. They're there to exert as part of an effort to exert. You know, it's like close MBR. They want to close MBR Acres, and for the beagles to be freed from there. And that's the primary aim of Camp Beagle.
And move somewhere else. So
yes, I mean the problem is there was something in the newspapers quite recently about 1,000 beagles being imported to this country. I think it was from Holland. So the trouble is, if the demand remains the same for beagles to be used in animal experiments, even if you closed MBR Acres, they would just be supplied from elsewhere. And even if you ended the use of beagles in animal experiments, if that didn't actually reduce the demand for animal experiments, then they would just be replaced by other animals. So that's the kind of difficulty I see with that kind of campaign, because it doesn't go to the fundamental. You see, it doesn't go to the fundamental, doesn't tackle the problem at the root. It's kind of tackling symptoms of a disease, and the disease is speciesism. The disease is human supremacism, and the cure for that disease is veganism, in terms of veganism being a philosophy of animal liberation. That's the cure for the disease, and so we need to try to cure the disease instead of constantly spending so much effort just on tackling the symptoms. Because what we've had tiny crumbs from the table for all the effort and all the campaigning that's gone on. But you see, the thing about like vegan outreach, it's kind of not something that's really properly been tried. It's kind of it's something that's only gone on for maybe the past 25 years, and it's only tiny in terms of its potential. To be honest, even then, despite that, we have seen this huge increase in vegans, or people who call themselves vegans, haven't we? Despite the kind of, relatively small amount of outreach that's gone on, there has been a really big increase in veganism. So, that kind of then sort of poses the question, well, if we had a lot more outreach, how many more vegans kind of could we create?
Well, absolutely.
And what would, yeah.
Can we go back to the final sentence of what Sharon said? We have to let the powers that be know what is happening.
But you see, the thing is, I don't think they care.
But I also don't think they don't know either.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, the other thing about protest is, you see, protest is a safety valve, and kind of there's a sense in which governments kind of need protest, and this is where the present government is perhaps taking a risk with these new laws, because you see, if someone's angry about something and you can allow that person to let off steam in a way that it actually doesn't make any difference, then that's ideal, isn't it? If someone's angry about something and they can go and wave a placard and shout, right, and that's kind of all they do, and that doesn't change anything, then that's what the government want, isn't it? But if someone's angry about something and they do something that actually is effective, or kind of could be effective, then that's what the government don't want. You see, and I think if these laws kind of drive people into doing more effective forms of bringing about change, then they could backfire in the government, and that operates in two ways. If it causes people, if you have people that kind of would have gone on protest, but they say, well, I'm kind of frightened now because I don't want to be arrested, so instead of going on the protest, I'm going to do vegan education, right? Then that's more effective, right? Or
that's your blessing in disguise.
Yeah, that's your, yeah. Or if people say, right, if I'm going to be arrested for that, then I might as well go full out and do something even more hard hitting and really get into direct action. Because if I'm going to be arrested for just doing a little protest, then why not be arrested for doing something that's like, more effective?
Or the third option, if I'm going to be arrested, I won't do anything.
You see, that's the kind of third option. But if what you're looking at is people that are doing the type of protest that doesn't really have any effect anyway, other than to let off steam, then whether those people do that or not probably makes little or no difference. But if you're driving people into doing more effective forms of action because they can't do ordinary protest, then that actually could be counterproductive for the government, and they run the risk of causing that to happen. Because all these things, the things that they say they brought these laws in for, those things are illegal anyway. And people can be arrested for those things. You can be arrested for sitting in the road. You can be arrested for locking on anyway. Under the existing laws, you don't need to bring in. Yeah, some of the legislation is a bit stronger. Like they've got this thing about if you're going equipped to lock on, you can be arrested. And I think that's a new thing. It gives increased powers and is a kind of, is a worrying development. But a lot of it, if the police are put under pressure by the government to enforce those laws, then they will. Even the existing laws, and that's where the problem lies. It's the police being used as a tool of the state in order to, enforce government ideology. And that's what's happening.
Well, there's a couple more things. These 2 points from BC are interesting, but I'm not sure if I understand them. I've said this on here before, but we won't figure out this out. We're not intelligent enough to deliver veganism. It will take AI to deliver the awakening.
Well, I don't know kind of how AI is going to. You see, I think that you see the veganism and the climate change are connected, because you see the reason we have the climate crisis really is to do with speciesism. I believe that that's the fundamental cause of it, and we did a show a couple of weeks ago about that, where kind of explains.
Yeah, so let's not concentrate on that bit. What about we're not intelligent enough to deliver veganism?
Well, the thing is, if you look at the really small amount of outreach that's taken place, right, and the increase in veganism that we've had, kind of as a result of that, if we were to increase outreach, if we were to get more vegans involved in outreach, then the number of vegans, I believe, would hugely increase.
Yeah, and so it's BC's follow-up, which is in line with what you just said, or at least the first part of this is, and then the last bit is a bit more confusing for me. The best thing we can do is be vegan and get as many people we meet to go vegan. So that's what you're saying, right?
Well, I don't know how. I kind of don't really know how this higher intelligence would operate. I kind of don't know what the kind of, the mechanics of that kind of would be. But I think that in order to create like the tipping point in terms of like creating social and cultural change in a big way is kind of, has been estimated to be 25%. So we kind of have to aim at educating 25% of people to go vegan, because you see, like if we get to a stage where we're in charge, then we call the shots. You see, but we never think of that. We never think of it in that way. We think about, or the movement thinks about, let's pressurize the existing powers that be to change things, when those powers that be are highly resistant to making the changes.
That's only part of the movement, though, Ronnie. I mean, you might be talking about Animal Aid and Viva there, where they're trying to pressurize government, trying to get bans and everything. The people doing the street outreach and even the influencers, they are trying to get as many vegans as
what
possible,
I'm saying is, what I'm saying is that our focus should be on us getting into a position where we call the shots, not that to have a focus on putting pressure on another group of people that call the shots to make changes that don't want to make.
But that's what I'm saying. Not all vegans are doing that.
No.
Yeah.
No,
I
there
mean,
are vegans involved
I
in
mean, the
education.
VIP, right,
Yeah.
in Ireland, I mean,
Yeah.
we've been in operation for 10 years. We've never spoken to a single politician. What's the point? Right? We've got to change the culture
Yeah,
first.
yeah,
Like,
no, exactly. No, I agree with you. We've got to change.
yeah. And
We've
so,
got to change.
it's
Yeah,
more like the
yeah.
national groups, the ones that you support, Ronnie, that are going for the thing that you say we shouldn't be doing. The
Well, I think,
influencers even
I
are
think
going
this.
for the public.
I think what you get with the, with the national groups is a whole combination of different things under the same umbrella. You get
So instead of working out what works, they're
you
just
get
doing all kinds
you
of
get
stuff.
vegan outreach, you get political lobbying,
Yeah.
you get
Which is too
protests,
early
you
for,
get
isn't it? It's too early for that.
you get, you know, and there is an aspect of, say, national groups here in the UK like Animal Aid and Viva, that there is a big aspect of them that includes outreach. It's just that they do the, you know, I mean, you know, there is an aspect of political
Yeah,
lobbying
but
as well included.
all that means, Ronnie, is they're dividing their resources between what you want and rubbish in your eyes.
Well, I think yes, I mean, I think that yeah, I mean, I would prefer to see um, them focus on outreach, obviously, because I think that's the kind of, you know, that's the most effective way of bringing about fundamental change, you know.
Hmm.
And of course, but
What
then
about
that applies,
this?
that kind of applies across the board, and that applies to, you know, not just to organisations, but to people in the movement in general. That you've got people that focus all the time on protest and don't do any outreach. And I'd like to see them include outreach in, you know, think about, well, how can I include outreach in what I'm doing? You know,
Okay, well, this one is from Andy, so it's obviously Britain. You're not far from each other. Do you know any genuine vegans involved in politics?
well, yeah, well, I think that yes, yeah, I kind of, yeah, I do. They're few and far between. In terms of in terms of national politics, there aren't that many, and it's also a question of like what you call a
Chris
genuine vegan.
Williamson, wasn't there? Chris Williamson.
Chris Williamson was Labour MP for one of the Sheffield constituencies, and he was kind of, and he was very left wing, so he was kind of, you know, the right wing of the Labour Party conspired against him, and he was thrown out of the party.
Yeah, well, so but that raises the same problem. Even if we got a few of them in now, it's still too early because they won't be able to do anything, will they?
Well, what we need to do is get a lot of them in by, you know, the more vegan education we do, the more vegan politicians we're going to end up with. You know, the aim is to get lots of them, isn't it? You know, all right, if you get one or two, you know, in now, then maybe it may make some sort of difference, but they'll be very limited in what they can do because they'll be opposed by people that don't share their views. But you know, if we get to a stage where we can, you know, because you know what you got to remember is that our current government here in the UK, they're elected by 29% of people eligible to vote. That was all that voted for this government, and they got in by really quite a substantial majority. And it's probably the same in other countries as well, you know, with governments that are elected. So you don't need to change everyone. You just need to change, you know, a substantial minority of people, really, in order to achieve what we want. And that's kind of, but you can only do that through education
Yeah,
and
well, but if
awareness
that's a
raising.
precursor, if that's a prerequisite for all the other things, then we need the entire movement doing what needs to be done first, rather than trying to do the stuff which would follow too early. That's the logic,
Yeah,
surely.
yes, yes, I think that's right. I think that's right. Because you're kind of, you're banging your head against a brick wall, really. That's the problem. You're asking people to do things that are totally against their fundamental ideology. And so they're just not going to do it. You know, but whereas what we need to do is change those people, get rid of them and have someone else there that is more likely to go along with what we want. That's what we need to be looking at doing instead of constantly, you know, banging our heads against a brick wall all the time. You know, that's and which has been what's been going on for decades.
Well, I would agree. I would agree with that, of course. Just looking through the chat in case anything else. Thank you very much for all the comments, people. My little message saying that you're not going to have to pay us is obviously working. So,
Oh, that's good. I mean, it's a shame we can't answer all the comments, of course, but we'd be here. We'd be here all night probably. But yes, I mean, I think the kind of the sort of bottom line, though, in a sense, is that kind of it could be argued that at least the people that are protesting are trying to do something. I mean, there's so many people that don't lift their finger to do anything at all, and even amongst vegans, so many vegans that don't do anything apart from like eat cake and stuff, you know. So you know, I kind of want to put all this in perspective. That at least the people who are protesting, they might not be doing what I consider to be the most effective thing in many cases, but at least they're doing something. And you know, so I think it's important to recognise that.
do you regard protests as single issues?
Well, I think I kind of think it depends. Yeah, I mean, often protests often are made on single issues, and they're not. You know, they're not.
The next question is, can they be abolitionized? So that's
Yeah,
the second.
well, I think yes. I mean, within the single issue, you can have an abolitionist demand, can't you? Well, rather than a welfarist demand, but you see that if you're wanting to promote veganism and you're wanting to you know, you want a message that will encourage people to become vegan in terms of, like, you know, not just in terms of the diet, but in terms of the overall philosophy, then it's kind of can be hard to promote that through a single issue. You can use a single issue as like a kind of gateway to it. I mean, I've done street stalls on single issues, and when people have come to the stall to sign the petition or whatever, I've given them information about veganism. You know, I've used it like to use single issues to attract people. You know, because at least they're people that, you know, care about, you know, a particular type of animal, and so you can then kind of
well, I think that's the change in single issues, and that's why they can be abolitionized, because you don't now get people in single issues actually castigating people for straying outside of that particular thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of unknown now, isn't it?
People is, you know, there are people that kind of are, you know, they're very kind of enthusiastic or moved by particular single issues. And I think, for instance, we've had animal experimentation come more to the fore.
Yeah, but it's not as though they'd only talk about that anymore, though, is it? Or at least
some do and some don't. But like what I'd like to see is them to include a go vegan message within their campaigns. In other words, okay, you can lead with the single issue that you're particularly concerned about, but then, you know, come on to, you know, to talking about veganism to explain that, you know, this particular
how much resistance would you say, Ronnie, would be? In other words, how many people are still stuck in that kind of, no, let's keep it strictly this single issue? Because most of that must have gone by now, surely.
I think there are people that are kind of still like that.
Okay.
But you see, how are we going to really realistically say we want to abolish animal experimentation? How are we going to do it? You're only going to do that if you've got the right people in Parliament. You know, you're not going to do it with the current lot we've got. Even if Labour
always comes back to the same solution.
It always comes back, yeah, exactly. You see, this is the thing. So the fundamental answer to all these things really is veganism, because that is curing the disease, isn't it? Out of which all these things spring as symptoms.
Yeah.
So that needs to be like kind of part of it. I mean, when Louis and I ran the Greyhound campaign, we had something very prominent on the first page of our website about promoting veganism, where it said, yeah, you know, what's being done to the greyhounds is terrible, but, you know, we need to remember that this is only part of like a bigger picture of oppression of other animals, and if you want to like oppose all of it, then the answer is to go vegan. And then there was information about veganism, and that's kind of how we connected it up. and we started producing leaflets that kind of had said similar to that on them as well. So that can be done. That can be included in these single issue campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, I do it by going, well, we're vegans, we're against animal use. This is the form of animal use, so therefore we're against it. But we'll be down the street somewhere else.
That's it. And I think that's how you kind of you position what your the particular single issue that you're campaigning on as part of as part of a much bigger picture.
Right. Well, before we go, I want to say hi and thanks for all your comments from Sharon, who's in Australia. So we don't get many Australians, so thanks very much.
No,
I recognize
that's really good. We're becoming.
I recognize the name from the show. But, yeah, thanks very much for tuning
That's great.
in.
I mean, our fame is spreading internationally now, Roger, isn't it?
Yeah, just go around waking everybody up, Sharon, and say, "Hey, do you know that this?"
Yeah. But I think that's the thing. I think yes. I mean, going back to the thing. Yes, I think that there are times when we protest instead of doing things that would be more effective, or instead of including more effective things as part of our protests. And secondly, I do oppose the the laws that are coming in. I think overall, they are a negative thing. And but until we have a radical change of government, I can't see that move, this movement towards more and more repression. I can't see that being halted until we have a change of government here. And I think it's the same in other countries now. Now it's interesting about Australia. I think Australia has brought in laws against protest, mainly to do with the protesters involved in the campaign to get the government there to take more action against the climate crisis. So I think Australia is one of the countries that's brought in more stringent laws, and it kind of tends to be kind of happening all over the world as there's more unrest, because you get unrest to do with the climate, but you've also got unrest because of neoliberalism and because you've got the rich becoming richer and the poor becoming poorer in a lot of countries. There's a lot of social unrest and protests to do with those. I mean, if you look at France, there were all the protests about France, them raising the retirement age, wasn't there, over there? And it's strange, really, because all those protests and all that fuss that was people kicked up in France, which sadly I don't think made any difference. The retirement age in the UK has been raised to much higher than it is in France, and yet no one was on the street doing anything like that over here.
No. Well, also, I mean, we've always said things like never again when we talked about the Nazis and the Holocaust and everything, because obviously that all began with austerity and poverty and all that in the 30s. But we're seeing a kind of repeat of this, because once you get such kind of a drive towards inequality like we've got with the neoliberal governments, and you get a lot of downtrodden people, a lot of them do turn to the right, and we are seeing this all over the place. I mean, and now, I mean, even in Ireland, right, which is obviously the history of the Irish and everything, but there's all kind of chaos going out on the streets with relation to immigration.
Yeah,
and there's camps being burnt down and people being beaten up, and there's been
because people are encouraged because people are scapegoated because people feel under pressure economically, and their lives become more stressed, become more unhappy, because of the political and economic system, right? But they're encouraged by the governments not to look for scapegoats, and not to attack what needs to be attacked, which is neoliberalism, but to attack other people, and to turn on immigrants, and to turn on, like we've got this thing about over here about the people coming in the boats, and it all has to be stopped and everything,
Yeah, and there's that
It's not
meme,
those
isn't it,
people. Those
saying
people
it's
aren't. Those
not people
people aren't.
in the boats that are a problem, it's people in the yachts that are a problem.
It's yeah. It's the people in the big car wearing a suit. They're the problem. But people are encouraged to turn on, to kind of for that anger and that frustration to be vented on.
But the frustration
someone
of
else.
that, Ronnie, is that people buy into that, don't they? They don't look up. They,
Yeah,
they
it kind of is a problem. But the only way that you change that really is through education, to encouraging people to say, "Hang on a minute, look, you need to kind of really look at this."
Well, education itself. I mean, like all you got to do is look on TikTok and social media. I mean, if you can judge education by people's grammar and spelling and stuff, there's a real dip even in that, because people don't know how to converse with each other. They don't know how to write messages to each other in a kind of a way that's not going to create some kind of backlash. Nobody seems to have the skills anymore, the kind of communication skills, and it's a genuine concern. I mean, like, we need very good communication skills within the vegan movement, but in society in general,
yeah,
I
know it is, of course.
Yeah.
But once again, the answer is education, isn't it? The answer is education, and like and in terms of like the oppression of other animals, the answer is like is vegan education, and the only people that can do that education are vegans, and so we need
we've gone over time. We've gone over time, right? But in taking the risk of doing it even worse is we haven't seen this for a long time. This is Graham Island. Even my brother suggested unaliving myself if I am concerned about not harming sentient beings. So back in the 1980s, 90s and 80s and 90s, there was a big push from the counter movements to this kind of idea of vegan suicide. If you really cared, you'd commit suicide, kind of thing, And they really kind of played on that line, but you don't hear it as much anymore.
The thing is, if all vegans committed suicide, well, then we leave it. We leave like kind of
we leave it to all you violent
coast
bastards.
clear for the
to
kind of fight for the animals. So I think that kind of, I think that's a really, I like the word unaliving. So I'm going to unalive you.
It's a TikTok thing now, because
that'd be good, wouldn't it? But yeah, I mean, I think the opposite's the case. I think, as vegans, we need to try to live as long as possible. We need to keep ourselves healthy and fit, and live as long as possible, so that we can, promote veganism and promote animal liberation for as long as possible, because we're the only ones that the other animals have got. So
that's right. I saw a meme today, which is that the best vegan from an anti-vegan or a non-vegan point of view is a quiet one, or in that case, a dead one. Because of obvious reasons, kind of thing, really.
Yeah. And so that's the thing, and we just need more vegans to be active, to spread the vegan message, because it's only vegans that can do it. And in a sense, that's the key. If we are going to succeed, the key to it is a lot more vegans getting involved in outreach, and probably, as I say, as I've said a few times before, the importance of vegans becoming instigators and encouraging other vegans in their local areas to get involved in outreach as well. It's really important to not just become like an activist, but to also become an instigator and encourage other vegans to get active.
Indeed, that's what we're here to promote, and that's what we do. So, Ronnie, we've overrun a little bit. I'm to blame,
as always.
So look, people, thanks ever so much for sticking with us, and we shall be back with another issue next week, providing, of course, Ronnie, that
we are still alive.